Every time I stood on the podium after winning a world championship, I had a secret that nobody in Formula One knew about. While the national anthem played, I would watch the mouths of the men standing next to me and copy what they were saying, just a fraction of a second behind, because I could not remember the words to my own national anthem. A man who could not spell his own name had just won the world championship. Again. When someone asked me recently who I loved the most in this life, the first name that came to me was someone almost nobody in Formula One had ever heard of. 3 world championships, 27 race wins, a career that ended on my own terms at a time I chose before the sport could take anything else from me. But here is what the record books never tell you. Behind every single one of those wins was a man who could not read a menu in a restaurant without quietly panicking. A man who had been told from the age of 9 that he was stupid, dumb, and thick. A man who stood in front of his class at school, looked down at the page, and saw nothing but a jungle of letters that refused to make any sense. I carried that shame for decades. Through every race, every championship, every dinner with kings and presidents, 5 people changed that. Not by fixing me, but by never once treating me as though I needed fixing. Without them, there are no trophies, there is no story, there is nothing. The first name that came to me was my brother Jimmy, not a world champion, not a team owner, not anyone whose name appears in the history books of Formula One. Just my older brother, 8 years ahead of me, who used to race on local roads and hill climbs around Dumbarton before I even knew what a racing car was. Jimmy was one of the smoothest and most naturally gifted sports car drivers in Britain during the 1950s. He drove for Écurie Écosse. He competed at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone in 1953. People who watched him said he had everything it took. Then Le Mans happened. Then the Nürburgring. 2 serious accidents. The same arm broken twice. 10 minutes trapped under a car on a German circuit with nobody coming to help. Jimmy walked away from racing and never went back. What Jimmy never told me, and what I only understood much later, was what he did next. When Ken Tyrrell was looking for a young driver and heard about a mechanic from Dumbarton who might be worth watching, Tyrrell picked up the phone and called Jimmy first. And Jimmy, who knew better than anyone what that world could cost a person, told him yes. His younger brother was serious. His younger brother was ready. Jimmy never asked me whether I could read the contract. He only ever asked me whether I wanted to drive. That was the first time in my life someone looked past what I could not do and only saw what I could. But Jimmy only opened the door. The man who walked through it with me was someone else entirely. Ken Tyrrell saw me race at Goodwood in 1964. I was nobody. I had no education, no credentials, no name that meant anything in motorsport. What I had was a car, a stopwatch, and something I could not explain even to myself. Bruce McLaren was there that day, testing the same Formula 3 Cooper that Ken had invited me to try. McLaren went out and set a time. I went out and beat it. McLaren went out again. I beat it again. John Cooper was watching from the side of the track and turned to Ken and said those words I will never forget for as long as I live. He said, "You have got to sign him." Ken signed me without a formal contract, not because he forgot, because he understood something about the way I worked, even before I understood it myself. A written agreement would have meant lawyers, documents, pages of text I would have had to pretend to read in front of people. Ken never put me in that position. We worked together for years on nothing more than a handshake and mutual trust. Nigel Roebuck, who covered Formula One for Motorsport magazine for decades, wrote that Ken was an extraordinary motivator with a great ability to choose the right people. That was exactly right. But what Roebuck could not have known was what that choice meant to a boy from Dumbarton who had spent his entire childhood being told he was not good enough for anything. Ken did not fix my dyslexia. He did not need to. He just decided that it had nothing to do with whether I could drive a racing car. For the first time in my life, I began to dare to dream. Ken gave me a career, but he never gave me the one thing I needed most, a reason for all of it to mean something beyond myself. The man who gave me that was Jim Clark, and he gave it to me by dying. When I arrived in Formula One in 1965, Jim Clark was already the greatest driver in the world. 2 world championships, 25 Grand Prix victories, a quiet Scottish farmer who happened to be the most complete racing driver any of us had ever seen. He could have made me feel small. He never did. Instead, Jim and Graham Hill pulled me into their circle from the very beginning. We traveled together, stayed in the same hotels, went on holiday with our wives and girlfriends. We called ourselves the Three Musketeers. Jim never once mentioned that I struggled with words. He never laughed at it, never used it, never even seemed to notice. In a world that had spent my entire life telling me I was stupid, Jim Clark treated me as an equal from the first day we met. Off the track, Jim was a different person entirely. He bit his fingernails. He could not decide which restaurant to eat at. He was shy in a way that surprised people who had only ever seen him behind a steering wheel. But put him in a racing car, and he became something that I am still not sure any of us fully understood. On the 7th of April 1968, I opened my diary and wrote 2 words: Jimmy crashed. That was all I could write. And the next morning, I made a decision that would make almost the entire world of Formula One hate me. I stood up and said that the sport needed to change, that drivers were dying because circuits had no barriers, no medical facilities, no basic infrastructure to keep a human being alive after a crash. People sent letters to magazines calling me timid. They told me to go back to Switzerland and leave racing to real men. For years, I was one of the most unpopular people in the paddock. But Jim Clark had died, and if Jim Clark could die, then anybody could die. That was the moment everything changed for me. Not just as a racing driver, as a person. Jim did not ask me to fight for safety. He never had the chance to ask me anything again. But losing him made it impossible for me to stay silent. Some things are worth being hated for. Jim Clark taught me that, and I have never stopped believing it. But Ken gave me a career, and Jim gave me a reason. What I did not expect was that the person who would teach me the most about loss was someone I was supposed to be teaching. Francois Cevert came into my life in 1970. 26 years old, impossibly charming, spoke 3 languages, played Chopin on the piano. Almost too good-looking to be a racing driver, that was the first thing I said about him. When he joined the Tyrrell team as my teammate, I made a decision I had never made with any other driver. I decided to teach him everything I knew, every corner, every braking point, every small thing that separated a good lap from a great one. I drove in front of him in practice and let him follow me through the circuit, because I knew what it felt like to learn something without being able to follow words on a page. I just never told him that. Francois said it himself. He said Jackie did all my education. I was driving like hell and not thinking enough about what I was doing. Mario Andretti later remembered how openly I talked about him in the paddock. He recalled me saying, "There is a future world champion here." By 1973, Francois was faster than me at certain circuits. He was 29 years old and only getting started. On the morning of qualifying at Watkins Glen, Ken suggested that since this was my 100th Grand Prix, it would be a wonderful gesture to let Francois win. I told Ken that was asking a great deal. I needed to think about it. That afternoon, I never got the chance to answer him. I saw the yellow flags at the S's. I stopped the car and ran. When I got there, I already knew, and I have carried one regret ever since. I should have stayed longer. I should have done something, anything. To this day, I regret not doing that. Ken refused to believe it. He asked me, "How do you know?" I said, "Ken, I was there. I taught Francois how to drive a racing car. He taught me that you can give someone everything you have, and it can still not be enough to keep them here." I walked away from Watkins Glen that evening and found Helen in the corridor of the hotel. I did not sit her down. I did not prepare anything to say. I just looked at her and told her that as of that moment, I was no longer a racing driver. She did not ask why. She did not cry straight away. She simply put her arms around me and said 4 words that I have never stopped thinking about. Now we can grow old together. I had known Helen since we were children. I married her in 1962, and I did not tell her on our wedding day that I could not read or write. I carried that secret into our marriage the same way I carried it everywhere else. Hidden, managed, kept away from anyone who might use it against me. But Helen was the one person in my life who made that secret feel smaller every year, without ever knowing she was doing it. She was known throughout the paddock as one of the finest timekeepers in the sport. She could measure a lap to the millisecond using nothing but a stopwatch. She filled 18 scrapbooks with every photograph, every invitation, every telegram and newspaper cutting from our life together. She was the keeper of every memory I was not able to write down myself. Her razor-sharp mind was one of the things I fell in love with. And it is part of that mind that is now vanishing. Helen was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia in 2014. Our son Mark has described watching her look around the home we built together and say quietly that she does not live here, that this is not her house, that she would like someone to drop her off at home. I know there may come a day when she cannot remember me, but I give her kisses and hugs every single day, and I will keep doing that for as long as I am able. For my whole career, I ran from the word stupid. Helen was the only person who never once looked at me that way. And now, as I watch her lose the memories that she spent a lifetime keeping safe, I understand something I should have understood much earlier. The thing I was most afraid of losing was never the speed. It was never the championships. It was the one person who always remembered exactly who I was. People will always remember the 3 world championships, the 27 wins, the tartan cap and the sideburns, and the name that somehow ended up on trophies, despite belonging to a man who could barely spell it. But when I think about what actually made me, it was never the car. It was never the circuit. It was 5 people who never once asked me to be anything other than what I already was. Jimmy showed me I could be good at something. Ken showed me I could dare to dream. Jim showed me that some things are worth fighting for, even when everyone around you thinks you are wrong. Francois showed me what it means to lose someone before they were finished, and Helen has shown me every single day what it means to be loved without condition. How many champions are built by talent, and how many are built by the people who believed in them before they believed in themselves?